so far.
Oh yeah. Oh, and a couple others. Just seen them pop up.
Hello.
Hello everyone. My name is Lenny, and this is Big Girls Read You Cry. And welcome to Let's Talk About. And we're still talking on the subject of death and grief and stuff like that. This is the lovely Heather over here. I have put a link in the description box below. Um, we were on her channel last week. If you missed it, then please go over and check it out. Um, but I think we're kind of going to round up the subject of death in this, even though it's such a big subject and expands in so many ways. I think we're going to round it up, but we may come back to it in different ways, like loss and grief and um, dealing with things in your past and all that type of thing, because it is such a huge subject, isn't it? But we just thought if
Huge.
anyone had any questions, anything that just wanted to say that they felt maybe when it happened to them, that when that you feel like maybe it didn't, other people, you didn't want, you haven't spoke about it because you feel like other people might see it as weird or whatever, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And one of the things I was going to bring up was is when you let your mind wander a little bit, and when your
Mm.
mind wanders, you have horrible thoughts. I'm going to say, in terms of what what's happened to them. What if like they hadn't died, and it's momentarily things, and I can knock them aside. And I did speak to my cousin because she mentioned things like this, where like, what if they weren't dead and they'd been put in the ground, or like having these kind of momentary flashes of horror of thoughts, you know what I mean, that just sort
Mm.
of then you wipe away, and that kind of thing. It's not the easiest thing to talk about in that sense, because it's kind of admitting in something that everyone, I know that that's not the case, do you know what I mean, but you sometimes your brain does that thing to you, doesn't it, that you just have. And even prior to them dying, I think it's also a thing where you could have like it's almost like a daydream, where your mind goes off in a daydream, and it could just be like fear that's bringing it on. But prior to them dying, like I would sometimes do that, where I thought they'd have died. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Or like,
I see what you mean. It's partly preparation, I think. If you know someone is dying, it's part
yeah,
of that coping and adjustment to go, oh, what if they were already dead? But a lot of this stuff comes from quite much deeper in the mind, where there is fear,
yeah,
and what if and what happens, and of course a lot of the world's very standard, if you like, sort of horror stories are based on the fact that someone who's not actually who everyone thinks is dead, who isn't, hence
yeah.
zombies and all that. It's a very universal thing. It really isn't particularly strange for the mind to go off on a bit of a jaunt around the darker edges
Yeah.
of what can be, because you've got to explore it all, haven't you?
I mean, I've even done it in my own self case of like, so if I'm going down a bank on the wheelchair, for instance, and then I have this sort of split second vision of the 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 airlock not working, and the wheelchair just going like straight on in oncoming traffic. Like, especially this certain bank. There's a certain bank, and when you get to the bottom, there's a quite busy, very high speed road that always fear. And sometimes I visualize it happening, and it's so weird. And then I'm kind of like, I'm shocked by myself of that thought, if you know what I mean. And
Yes, it's quite dark, isn't it?
yes, because it is very dark. And I remember being in hospital and being like, at the time I was like, my mental health was really severe, and I remember looking at a pair of scissors and just thinking in my head, stab them in your wrist, like that, you know what I mean? But then being shocked by my own thought, and
Yeah.
it's so strange, because I've had that in terms of like, if or maybe it was just a dream, or if I've just been thinking about something, and then I've seen something happen to one of the kids or to my parents or something, prior, you know what I mean? Obviously, this was a prior thing, but also after my mum and dad's passed away, I've kind of had, oh my God, what, like, we never saw them die. What if they weren't really dead? And you know,
Yeah.
I know it's not. I know it's. I don't want to say madness. That's not the right word.
No.
I know it's not. I can't work out how to explain it, but I wanted to bring it up because I kind of felt that I know that my cousin had similar things go on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And my sister's very sort of black and white and straightforward in that sense that those things didn't occur to her, but like, and I don't know if it is for other people as to whether they've ever felt like that, whether it's been something that you've sort of daydreamed could possibly happen, but it feels really real, or whether it's just something that's been a split second and you can sort of push it away. But yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a lot more common than you think. A lot of people won't talk about what goes on in their heads because they think someone will think I'm weird, or it's why have I gone to the worst case scenario, which is fear is what drives it, whether it's for your own personal safety, and it may be your intuition is telling you don't go down that bloody bank today, maybe you shouldn't. That's quite reasonable, but when it's about other people as well, it is playing through the fears. What could happen? What's the worst? And your mind is far more elastic and creative than we give it credit for. You know, our brains do far more than we ever actually see or notice. And catastrophizing stuff or sort of trying to predict the future in the worst way is one of those things. Obviously, if your mental health is, if you're at a point where your mental health is really suffering, then it's harder to push it away, and then it becomes more intrusive and happens more often, in which case that's something that clearly needs to be addressed, because then it will continue to worry you. But generally it's not that strange a thing by itself. It's what's going on around and what your overall mental health is at the time, because obviously that way, that kind of thinking does tend to increase during episodes of not having good mental health. So it's a good warning sign if you're getting a lot of it. You know what?
It definitely happened like more prior. Like my mental health is pretty stable now, and so prior, you know, going back 4 years or whatever, it definitely happened more in that time frame. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of it, I think, was fear. But I've had flashes of it since my parents have died, and I know that speaking to a cousin of mine, she had similar things, but then she tried to speak to her sister about it, who was kind of like, "Don't be stupid, man." You know what I mean? You kind of, you know, and sort of
logic reaction.
Yeah. And I think my sister would probably be the same if it was to be said. But I agree with you that I think it is more common, which is kind of why I wanted to bring it up, because I just wanted people to think that they're not alone in that sense. And if it's something that's happening too much, or that they're starting to believe what these thoughts do, it's then that they need more help and support.
Exactly, that's the problem. Yeah.
Yes.
And Susan said there, it's that horror movies play on those fears, but the creation of horror movies actually comes out of what our own fears are. So they literally take it onto another level. All of the things that people tend to be scared of, unknowns, unexplainables, you know, random things happening to random people, and the surprise element. So all the ingredients of a good horror movie.
Definitely.
Yes, Nick. Yeah, Nick said, absolutely. I have thoughts about while driving about how easy it would be to drive into a truck, etc. And in some ways, it's quite healthy to have a strong sense of self-preservation and to be aware that we're mortal, which means you don't take silly risks. But there is obviously a fine line, and anyone will know who struggle with the mental health, it can quite easily go over into feeling very pulled into it. Or compelled, but that, you know, that's something that obviously requires some interventions. But yeah, you know, it's always there, just below the conscious, just below your everyday thoughts. There's this whole stream of stuff that goes on that we rarely tap into. And death and grief and loss and all of that is very much a part of that.
Yeah, because it even though it's something that happens naturally to everyone, it is kind of like a fear, isn't it? And
Mm.
a horror, essentially, especially if a person's younger and they die in I can't say it, horrific way. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like that kind of thing. Yeah, it changes.
Yeah,
things.
it's one of these things that, as Fauna said that there is a real stigma, and people are still, even in this day and age, wary of who they talk to about having darker thoughts. Well, dark thoughts are just light and shade in what goes on in our minds, and I think talking about them is probably a lot healthier
Yeah,
than shoving it all away and pretending it's not happening and trying to make light of everything, because life isn't all light. We need the we need the contrast.
definitely, definitely. Chrissy says, "Hi all. Have not had a chance to watch first two yet. My dad passed at 38, and now my mum is 88, and has just come out of hospital and doesn't want treatment. My health isn't good. It's all so tricky." Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
well,
imagine that. That must be really hard. Not just coming to terms with your mum not wanting any further treatment, and
mm,
also having your own health issues, and your dad passing away so young. Is 38 is no age, is it?
no, exactly. I mean, that's a hell of a shock of anyone dying at that age. But the fact that you have a parent who has made a choice, and it's difficult to respect that choice because it feels very much like, but how can you do that?
Yeah,
But your mum will have her own reasons, and I'm sure that's something hopefully that she'll be able to talk to you about.
yeah,
Um,
hopefully.
but it is difficult not to separate things when it all appears to be very lumped together. Mm.
Jordan's saying about being on bridges and mountains with really high drops, and he's had the urge or thought to jump, even though he doesn't want to, just to see what happens. It's kind of thing. It's scary. Do you know what? I've had that similar thing going across bridges. I'm not a fuss. I get dizzy with heights anyway, so I think it's partly um, what's the word? What's the word when you get dizzy with heights?
Vertigo.
Vertigo, yeah. So it's partly that, but also I know I remember another friend who said that she wouldn't cross the bridge because she just thought it was gonna fall off. And as a child, I couldn't cross. Like I had to close my eyes when we went across the bridge because I felt like it was just gonna disappear underneath. So
Crossing bridges is quite a common fear.
yeah,
It's again, many years ago, I worked with a wonderful, wonderful lady who had to travel across we have a very big bridge and tunnel system, the Dartford Tunnel, and there's the bridge
yeah,
across the Thames, or the Thames estuary, and she had to go over there for meetings, and she would drive miles around and avoid it. She kind of realised she couldn't keep doing that, so we had
yeah,
hypnotherapy to work with it. But
yeah,
it's all down to fear. It's all down to a basic fear about our
yeah,
inability to survive, and it just happens to get linked into something. But that kind of, as 1994 Clapham was saying, that whole thing about there is a bit of an urge to kind of push the boundaries.
yeah,
And
yeah.
when people are younger rather than when they're older, they get less
Maybe
risky as they get
maybe
older.
it's because when you're younger, you have that kind of uh, it, especially as a child, you have that kind of um, unbreakable type of
Yeah.
thought to yourself. Do you know what I mean? In most cases, you kind of like think you're some sort of superhero.
The
You know?
immortal thing is very much a thing for certain of the childhood years, part of that.
Yeah, yeah,
And that obviously that changes as you get older. But the whole wondering thing, and it is wondering what what it will be like. People often wonder, what would
yeah,
it be like after death? What the thought of the loss of personality
yeah,
is almost impossible to comprehend. So that the mind naturally starts to explore these things because it's part of life. And even if consciously you're not admitting to it,
yeah,
there is always a part of your mind going, I want to be doing this, I want to live my life this way, this is what, and often it gets shut out.
yeah.
Mm.
Susan says, one thing I wanted to say after previous shows is that it's never too late to get help with grief.
Yeah.
I had counselling in my 40s for two deaths I'd experienced in my childhood, and it helped me tremendously.
Yeah, I
Totally
couldn't
agree with
agree
that as
more,
well.
Susan. Yeah, it is never too late. I used to work with people from every age, from teenagers up to people in their 70s and 80s, on all kinds of things. It's never too late to change things for the better. It truly isn't. The brain is not set in stone. It's not like you become fossilized as you get older. You can appear to if you get rigid in your thinking, but actually the brain is very able to take on new experience and make changes absolutely at any age.
I think sometimes we just block paying out so much that, like, and you just sort of go on autopilot, or in a way, but it always comes back. I think things always come back up. It just, you know.
Yeah, I kind of reckon, I mean, many people through at some point in their life may have had some kind of a nervous breakdown. It's incredibly common, particularly in the way society is these days and the pressures people are under. But I kind of think it's because there's been a build-up and it's got ignored, it's got pushed back, and then eventually the body and all the mind goes, enough, and absolutely forces you to have to stop. And I think people naturally are told to keep pushing themselves. What I'm delighted to say is that the sort of newer generations coming through are being much more aware of their mental health and of those issues, and seem to want to be taking more part in looking after themselves that way, which I think is a good thing.
Definitely, because I think things in the past and years ago, it was always, push yourself down, you get back on with it type of thing. You have to get on with it and move forward and whatever. And life's not like that,
No, sometimes you do just have to crack on. It's true, that's a survival thing, but you have to take the time out to reevaluate. And oftentimes it's some while after whatever it is that's traumatic that's happened, when you're back on an even keel and you go, right, I don't feel back to normal. There's no such thing as normal anymore. And to take the time to look at it and to be able to talk to somebody who's completely outside of the situation. That could be a very good friend, it could be a family member, but it's so much easier to talk to somebody who has no invested interest in whatever the subject matter is.
Someone who has no need to be on your side or whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Or to necessarily try and fix it. Just to have somebody who will listen and let you bounce your own thoughts and ideas off is quite important. And that's really what a lot of, at least certain basic level counselling is about. It's about being heard.
Some of the bits that I wrote down, because obviously I know, like, we're just kind of going over things that we've spoke about, or if anyone wanted to say anything that they wanted to talk about, which they can. I wrote some questions down, and I'd put, do you ever get over grief? Do you ever does grief ever stop? Because personally, I feel like it doesn't. I just think that those people that you lose, whether it's called grief still, I'm not sure. Is grief still in the earlier part? Is grief the whole part for throughout your life? In a way, I kind of think, like, you just deal with it in a different way. Like you cope in a different way. Like since my parents have died, I've gone through all sorts, shock, anger, whatever. Not my parents was. I'm not angry at them at all, but like I feel like I've felt guilty about being happy. I felt guilty about smiling or whatever, and yet I know that, like, I've always come back at myself with, this is what my parents would want. If they were able to look down on me now, that's what they'd want, is to be able to see that I was doing something positive and I was happy, and you know what I mean? And so I always come back at myself with things like that whenever I feel a bit low. But I don't think that grief ends. I think you deal with it better as time goes on.
I think the pain diminishes, it just fades a little bit, but the overarching sense of loss, particularly when there have been many through a long life, does accumulate. It does become a sort of a bit of a burden in itself. And learning to live with loss and adjusting to it is part of the evolution of somebody as they grow older. But there are always going to be moments when it comes right back at you for whatever reason. Something will jog your memory, something will bring something back from a past, a photo or music or whatever will trigger. And that will never entirely go. And I think to expect it to just be gone would be naive at best.
Yeah. It's I think it, and like you said, it's kind of because you give these people your love and whatever, and when they're not there, it's like, where does that go? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, I don't know. It's sort of like it feels like it's got nowhere to go in a sense.
It's because love is energy, really, isn't it? It's a positive energy. So my take on it is, even if the person is physically not about, their energy is still around. So the fact that the love is still there means they still,
because a part of who you are as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
a part of who you are. So therefore, that energy still lives on, essentially.
Yeah, energy is always there.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about in regard to this is also what people also tend not to talk about or feel embarrassed about talking about is the loss of an animal in their life, because animals usually have a shorter lifespan than we do. So their mortality is more immediate. So that can be, as I know Andrew and Nick won't mind me saying, they know full well how that is, having had their pets. And I think we feel that with our pets and companions in life. And also losing, even sort of losing a child before it's born, that kind of thing. It also kind of builds up how you can deal with that. But yeah, I'm sitting here looking at my Maximus Verbal, who's basically sprawled across the top of my printer. And yeah, he's a cat, so hopefully he'll live another good 10 years, but he probably won't live as long as I will. And you always have that sense of the mortality of the animals that you have. Yeah.
That's the only thing with pets, isn't it? They just don't live long enough for us, but what they give you is unreal. But I think there was a few things gone by. John says counselling is beneficial at any age. It's helped me through some difficult times. John says I think it was more embarrassment and denial for previous years, and they used to say, like you said, Lenny, brush it off and carry on. I think especially for men, there was a lot. The men didn't cry. Men just, you know what I mean. Men had to be the strong ones and whatever. Yeah, it is ridiculous, etc. But that's in years ago, and even for some people still nowadays, they can't get past that because maybe a parent that they had did the same, did that thing. You know what I mean? Passed it on, kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely.
It says, my life was a mess at times. As a teenager, a close family friend killed himself. That's really hard to go through. Claire says, that's so true about ignoring things. I'm terrible at keeping very busy rather than facing the feelings. Talking is the answer, and grief is circular. Sorry, I'm not the great. Goes up and down, round and round, but you do go on. Yeah. And Andrew says, I don't think grief ever goes. When we lose our loved ones, we miss them every day. And are still triggers that can make us cry or feel our loss as much as when we first lost them. Yeah. I agree. Sylvie also says, don't think it ends. It changes to easier memories and the pain is not as strong. Another thing that I wrote down was talking about them. You know what I mean? Like, I like to talk about my parents. I like to tell stories about them, and because it brings them alive to other people, and I feel that people missed out on knowing them because they were so amazing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I suppose that's one way of doing it, isn't it? By bringing them to life to sort of in the stories that are their life, I suppose.
Yeah, and it helps. It does. You're remembering the good things. You're remembering the connection and the love and all the positivity. there, and that can only ever be a good thing for you, for their memory, for the people who knew them, everything.
Yeah. John says, I think people sometimes think if they aren't grieving that they've forgotten who they've lost, which is not the case. No. I think sometimes people put such guilt on themselves about it. You know what I mean?
About what they think they should be doing, or what they think grief should look like, or how you should manage it. There really aren't any shoulds or oughts about it.
And also, like, bringing up little things of conversations that they may have had that they kind of thought, like, why did I say that? Or they've gone over them in their heads and whatever. But sadly, you can't sort of go back and change those things. You can only know that the person that loved you never looked at it in that sense. So, yeah. Paula says, popped in for a sec, but after hearing the question, do you ever get over grief? I wanted to say, I also think that over time, one grieves for the person you once were before the loss as well.
Yes.
To be.
Oh God, sorry, there's a cat coming. Oh, Max.
Getting down.
There he is.
Yeah, but also you could, I suppose, in that sense, if you looked after a person for a long time before they've died, and it's been your daily routine, hours of a day, so you probably feel very lost as a person. I think that probably happened to my sister, but and my brother. But I also think that there also could be a bit of a relief, because you're not on tender hooks all the time. You're not like in constant need. But then I think a lot of people are probably more likely struggle with it, in the sense of like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, sort of sense of purpose, isn't it, really? If that suddenly changes. This cat is just mad. He's just huge furball. Thinks he's a baby. He really does. Oh, my little familiar. He's listening.
Clive says, I put my dad's grief, his passing into suspension as I was caring for my mum, and 3 years on I'm trying to face it now. It's hard, but good memories are okay to look at now. More smiles than tears. I definitely would advise, like, if you haven't already, to look into some sort of bereavement counselling, speaking to your GP, or even, I know, like, locally for us to do ones where you can just refer yourself, type of thing, or you can contact certain charities directly, because it's a massive help, and it doesn't matter how far on you are, because so many of us don't deal with it at the time, that they would still help, and it's beneficial to anyone, really.
Yeah, there's no time limit on it. Absolutely not. And particularly a parent or a child, someone that close.
Yeah.
But it can be all kinds of things that can trigger that massive sense of loss.
Yeah. Nick says, I felt the loss of Monty more deeply than even my grandparents. I never cried so much in my life.
Yeah.
But he was constantly in your life, you know what I mean?
But that's the thing. They do. I mean, animals do kind of worm their way into your heart very easily. And I mean, obviously now they've got Jeff.
Yeah.
Jeff the dog, who is an absolute darling.
Yeah.
And he's going to become just as loved and just as much part of the family, and I think
like you can talk to them, can't you? And they can, like, it's like the listening, and you can get out whatever it is you need to say, and having someone there, and they just give you like hugs and kisses and whatever, and it's just unconditional, isn't it?
Yeah, and they do read emotions incredibly well. And dogs particularly, cats do to some extent, but dogs in particular are famous for it, in that they will know if you're upset and immediately offer reassurance and comfort, etc. Yeah, it's extraordinary, really. Yeah. It's so easy to be connected to an animal because they come with no agenda or no no issues. They just come as themselves, don't they?
Yeah. John says, my dad died 40 years ago. I still think of him every day, but the grief is very different. Old cliche, isn't it? Time heals or time helps. We learn a different way to live without our loved one. Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the time's a healer, which is the one I usually hear. Oh, don't worry about it. Time's a healer or whatever. Um,
Mm.
is it a healer or is it just that we deal with it differently?
I think people find ways to cope and
Yeah.
ways to compartmentalize the grief a little so that they can function on a day-to-day level. And it is still there. You don't lose the love of somebody, but I
No.
think things do fade off. Other things go on. You've only got so much space in your head. So, yeah, it tends to get compartmentalized. But as long as it's acknowledged and not blocked off, then it will evolve and it will mellow a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lauren says, hi all. It is almost 12 months since my husband died. The pain and often overwhelming despair is as real today as it was in the weeks following his death. I have just got used to the feelings. Still very early, like afterwards, isn't it? 12, it's not quite 12 months. And
Yeah.
especially the first anniversaries of things, I
Mm.
felt like really hard. I mean, I haven't gone through second anniversaries of things yet, but well, Christmas I have, but I would again suggest getting, speaking to someone about it, as we've said, because I think it can only help.
Yeah, it helps you process
Yeah,
and tune into it and not be frightened by it and not be just, it just helps you cope with it in a more healthy way mentally so that you
yeah.
processes rather than get stuck, because that's what you don't really want, is things to get stuck. Yeah.
Susan says, to me, grief is an expression of love for the lost one, and for that reason, it never ends because you still love them. You just get accustomed to them not being around, whether it be a person or an animal, which
Yeah.
is true. Sylvia said, my daughter made me cry the other day. She's just given birth, and one of the things she's done is wrap the baby in an old cardigan of my mum's, which she has kept in a sailor bag. Even uh, even I could still catch my mum's scent on it. Oh, that is
Mm.
lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were so touched, but your son was a bit freaked out by it.
Yeah, different people take, read different things into it, and I think it's a very individual thing, but it's a
Yeah,
nice thing to do, and it gives you that connection back through the ancestors, through the generations, and that connection is strong. And you think of all the people who've gone before that you never met, who are part of your ancestry, if you like, part of
yeah,
your family that you've never known. And although it only goes back a couple of generations, that love and personal remembrance of somebody, somehow that's all somehow still there. That
yeah.
pool of humanity is still there. Mm.
John says smells bring back so many memories. I think that there's been studies on it. Smells from your childhood, etc.
Yeah,
Um,
huge.
and it enhances memories.
Yeah.
Um, the that's one thing. 'Cause recently, they've been doing a lot of road works around where I live, and stuff. And there was such a strong smell of tar, which reminded us of my dad because my dad used to resurface roads, one of his
Mm.
jobs. And I remember as a child him coming home, there's such a strong smell of tar. I absolutely loved it because it meant my dad was home. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, oh, I don't know where
Oh,
you went.
hang on, I'll get it back. I don't know what's happened there. Let me
Um,
try and see if I can get back.
so yeah, that reminds me so much. You back? That reminds me so much of my dad. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, and it's so weird though, because my brother has the same thoughts on tar as well. Like he loves the smell because of a memory of my dad, whereas my sister doesn't like it. It's
Yeah,
so
I,
weird,
li-
isn't it?
I like the smell of petrol for a similar reason, because my,
Yeah.
my dad was always tinkering around in the garage, and
Mhm.
was a self-taught mechanic and would build cars, and was basically never happier than scrabbling
Yeah.
around in a pile of rusty components. So yeah, those kinds of garagey smells to me always, they're nice things. Yeah, it's a good smell. Yeah. But it goes to such a deep part of the brain. It's a sort of deep emotional center that scent goes to, which is why it's so incredibly evocative and
Mm,
can change your state quite rapidly. So scents are very, very powerful things. Yeah.
yeah. Um, Jordan says, I think the only thing that heals a loss is being busy. Being so busy that you don't have time to think, a distraction. I don't think time is a healer. Being occupied temporarily distracts you.
Mm.
I
Being busy
don't
can help you
necessarily.
cope, I think. It does help you
Yeah,
cope
it helps
through.
cope, but if you still haven't dealt with parts of it, it's always going to be there, and eventually, I think it hits you. Like
Yeah.
you've still got to deal with the death. You can't just ignore it. You can't just pretend it's not happened, or block all the pain from it and just march forward, because eventually it will catch up with you. But I do agree that keeping busy at times and having those distractions is good, as long as you're still working through the loss at the same time.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Agreed.
And being able to switch off from it as well, which is kind of hard. And I think that's why sometimes people bury it, because they don't want to deal with the pain, because it is
Mm.
hard to face. But also, um, is then being able to sort of, it sounds switching off from it is not the right word, but like, do you know what I mean? Just to sort of like
Mm.
move forward from that place at that time, after you've sort of felt so devastated. And I've sat there and cried and like broke my heart crying, felt so devastated, but then being able to like, right, take a few deep breaths, and like, I'm gonna go and watch this, or I'm gonna do something to be able
Yeah.
to to move from. Or sometimes I've just gone to sleep, because that's the best option at that time. Do you know what I mean? And I just,
Exactly, and you have looked at it and you felt what you felt, and then you've ridden the wave of it and come through it. And I
yeah,
think that's the important thing. If you're trying to hold back the tide and not have it, it will come through, as
it
you
will
said,
come
and it
through
can come
eventually.
through
Yeah,
in your body, becoming unhealthy for all sorts of reasons, because mind and body are incredibly connected.
yeah,
So sometimes, if you're feeling very stressed or very upset, it will actually come out in a physical way.
yeah,
It's very much, it doesn't happen to everybody, but it certainly happens to me. You have to be very careful with that. And also, it will come out in your dreams and stuff as well, if it's not,
yeah,
because your dreams are trying to process what's happening in your day-to-day life. So, those sorts of things can be useful signals not to be ignored.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
definitely. Um, and one of the other questions is like, what is life like without them? Like that's what I wrote.
Yeah. Different. Very different.
Yeah,
And it changes your place in the world as well. When you've lost parents, particularly, you're no longer someone's child. You're no longer
yeah,
in the hierarchy. You actually have moved up to be one of the elders, one of the older members of the family, and that can be quite unsettling and quite a thought.
yeah,
And it can change how you view what life's about and what you want from it quite substantially, I think.
yeah. I agree. I think that there's all sorts of ways of looking at that. Because you've got like, obviously, just like I said before, with my mum, because she'd had dementia. The person who died wasn't my mum. Is it in a way? It
Yeah.
was, but it wasn't. Looked
Mm.
like my mum, and there was little bits of my mum like that would flash, but like the rest of it, so it was so different to my dad, who, apart from becoming frail, like watching someone become frailer, and
Mm.
that's really hard. You know what I mean?
It's really sad, especially when you see someone go downhill so quickly, and they
Yeah,
seem to age before your eyes. You know, they've been
yeah,
fine, and then all of
exactly.
a sudden, dum, 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 dum.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's. I remember that with my husband's mother as well. In the last time I saw her, when she was ostensibly reasonably well, she looked like a sparrow. It was like, oh my god,
yeah,
whoa. You know,
yeah.
I was very unsettled by it because I hadn't seen her in a long while. I knew things weren't right then. Yeah.
But obviously, my dad lost his sight, and he's like, yeah, it's just because of degeneration.
Mm.
So you could only see shadows. Eventually, you got to the point where you could only see shadows and shapes and stuff. And then his brain would put stuff in the way, like would place things there because your brain
It fills
uh,
in the gaps.
fills in the gaps. So we used to sit next to my mum on the floor beside a chair. So his brain would do that. He would like he knew that it wasn't real, but his brain would put us on the floor beside the chair, and we were all adults at the time, obviously, you know. And he
Yeah.
really struggled with that. But I mean, he was in his 80s, you know what I mean. Um, so I think it's hard to watch your parents become frail, but then in some ways we're lucky because people lose their parents at such young ages that like my mum always said that getting old was a blessing and getting old was a privilege, you know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
and
Because think
it
of the alternative.
is definitely yeah.
Yeah.
And she always used to say plenty of people would swap you in the graveyard, you know what I mean, type of thing. Um
Yeah.
and it is a privilege and it is, but it's so hard to watch them deteriorate like from these sort of I don't know, strong people that you once knew to like in my dad's case, he became like I think something like 7 stone and you know
Mm.
like tiny and very frail and very fearful of everything.
Yeah, the
And
roles switch completely, don't
yeah,
they? The
it's
whole
so
balance
so
switches.
sad to watch that.
Mm.
Um, but yeah. Um, right, where were we? Susan. Life without my mum. I remember thinking now there's no one in the world who will always unconditionally be my friend and on my side. It was a heartbreaking feeling. Yeah, I totally get that. Totally get that. Kind of like yeah, like my dad always said, "Your mother's your best friend." Like always, it's like, you know, kind of thing, and it's true.
Mm. Mm.
Bloody awful. Quite lonely, but not for company. I have plenty of friends and family. I'm lonely for Robert. There's no words for how much I miss him.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mm.
I can't understand it in the sense that like I've never had a partner in that way, but I understand it even my like with my mum and dad were together for 50 years. My dad died before my mum, and even though she had dementia, she never forgot. Like she would you could distract her, but then it would come back. And I just always remember hearing that cry that I you can't, you know what I mean? It is
Mm.
because of a partner, the loss of a partner. But I would definitely speak to your GP or someone who, or other people in a similar situation, because that they're gonna totally understand what you're going through. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
And
got
the
to be
loneliness. Yeah.
yeah, there's got to be support groups and stuff um, online, uh, on Facebook if you've got Facebook, or if not, like locally, if you look in the area. I think those things can only help because having someone else who totally gets what you mean
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
always
It can only help. It certainly won't hurt.
yeah,
It won't make the pain go away, but again, any help is going to help move it along and make life more tolerable a little bit
yeah,
quicker. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, the loss of a partner, of course, that's always going to be there. Mm. Yeah, difficult times, Lauren.
Definitely. Joan feels the same way about the loss of her mum, how lucky we were to have them. And that's the thing. That's the other thing, is that I feel like I've I was lucky to have the parents I had. You know what I mean? And I suppose for other people, whether it's their partner or anyone, to have them in your life at all, it's just that it's really hard when you feel like it wasn't that time, or you know it it didn't go how it should have gone. Not that I know that there's an exact, there's no method, there's no exact science
Mm,
on that, is there? Unfortunately, but
exactly. I must admit that, well, on my occasional musings, I do sometimes wonder what it would have been like if my mum had been around, so that I could have known her as an adult, had those kind of conversations, whether she would
yeah,
have met my son, who she would have adored, I'm sure, and what she would have been like as an older person.
yeah,
Again, it's that thing where your mind goes off on little trips and goes, oh, I wonder what she would have been
yeah,
like
what
now.
we
She would have
like,
been
yeah.
nearly 80, wow.
And I suppose that's the same as if
Yeah.
big things happen in your life.
Mm.
You can
Yeah,
maybe
my
think,
weddings and,
yeah, where you
my
can,
son and,
yeah,
yeah, all that sort of thing. It would have been nice to have had the support of a parent at those points in my life when it would have been really useful to have it.
yeah,
All I can do is ensure that as I get older, A, I stick around as long as I can, and B, I will be supportive. That I can only offer that because it was never there for me.
yeah,
But yeah, so it's kind of the loss of something is always there on some level, I think.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Or just going through a difficult situation, especially like prior to my mum's dementia, she would be always the person I turned to in any thing that I need, because she just had such amazing. She always made us feel better, one, but also she always seemed to have the answer, which was like, do you know what I mean? Or she knew what to do. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it. So,
Sounds
um,
like a very special
yeah,
lady.
yeah, definitely. And so when obviously the dementia, I couldn't speak to her about things like that because the dementia would just
Mm.
took that away. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah, you lose that part of your relationship with her, which obviously was a very key part. Then
yeah,
you've lost part of that person already, haven't you? Really? Mm.
definitely. She still knew though. She still knew if something wasn't right. She
Oh,
could
I
still
bet. Yeah,
tell.
intuition doesn't stop.
Yeah, yeah. She could still
That's a
tell.
deeper part of the brain, you see.
Yeah,
Mm.
she still knew if something, and she would quiz you, but then after the initial quiz in your mind, she would get distracted again, so you couldn't really explain anything. But
Yeah.
um,
Mm.
what else have I wrote down? I've said about talking about grief. Um, we've talked about not embracing the pain because it's too painful or overwhelming.
Yeah.
Um, I think I've pretty much covered everything I'd wrote. But the other thing we were going to talk about was where what would people like us to talk about next? Because that is
Yeah.
where we're going to go, isn't it? We're going to, and we did write some notes down, but if anyone has any suggestions, because we are going to cover various subjects over however long we do, but like I think we wrote, what did we write down? Disability, health issues. Uh,
Addiction, life-work balance, mental health. Yeah, I mean, how it could be endless, couldn't it? But we just thought,
yeah,
if people in the audience had a particular place they'd like us to go next.
yeah. So if
What should
anyone
we
wants
do?
to put some suggestions in, and then we'll see what you know. If you have mental health, if it's sort of life work, disability, um, anything really. If you've got any suggestions, and put them in, and then we'll decide whatever route we're going to go down for next week.
Mm, mm,
Jordan says, my nan kicks herself 50 years on from the death of her mother. They were both at pub, and her mum wanted 10p to play on a slot. My nan said no, and she got run over when walking home. My nan always thinks if she'd give her that 10p, she wouldn't have been crossing the road when the drunk driver was there.
oh, what ifs? You see, that's the horror,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
Really,
you can't,
it's yeah.
you can't. I can understand why your nan would say that, but you can't live like that, can you? As much
No,
as like it was the only person who was at fault there is the drunk driver.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
thankfully, there's laws now where that's
yeah,
fractionally less likely to happen, thankfully. But yeah, I know back in the 70s or whatever, you know, people would drive around
yeah,
irrespective of what they'd had to drink.
totally. So, yeah, we've put out a few subjects, but if anyone wants to name anything that you might suffer with that you know, thought you would want us to talk about. I mean, mental health is just a massively broad one as well, isn't it? There's
Oh,
all sorts of
yeah,
different,
crosses all the boundaries, doesn't it,
yeah.
Chris?
Obviously, disability, something that I face, but I don't feel like I'm disabled, but that's a different thing. And um, just sort of life, work, anything you like.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, if anyone's watching this on catch up, please pop something in the comments below.
Yeah,
We'll see where we go with it all. Small,
definitely.
fat, furry animals, of course. Topic of the day.
Just lying like a baby, isn't he?
He does, Maximus Verbal. Oh, we're off. Hang on. A flurry of paws and floof. Oh, okay. That's enough now, is it? Stiff-legged walk out of the room.
Let's talk about kittens.
Kittens! Yes, let's talk about kittens. My cat, who is not a kitten, he's called Maximus Verbal. Max for short. And I've got another one called Tinker. He's a big tabby cat. Just the two.
Yeah.
And you've got Jasper, haven't you? Have you got cats or just Jasper?
Just Jasper. Yeah.
No.
He's a dog. He'd like to be friends with cats, but cats don't like to be friends with him.
Funny that. I've seen pictures of him though. He's lovely. He looks a lot like the dog my nan had when I was a little kid. He's got the same sort of face with the little whiskery things. Yeah.
He's absolutely. And Nick says, thanks for the chat. Lots of food for thought. No problem. Well, we'll wrap it up here then. And we'll be back next week on Heather's channel. So make sure you go over. As I have said, a link is in the description box below. And if you're watching this back later, as Heather said, please put any suggestions of what you'd like it to talk about. And we'll come up with something by next week, and we'll do that.
We will indeed.
Yes. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and thank you to Heather. And we shall see you next time. Bye-bye.
Here we go with the waving. Bye.